Welcome back. So today I want to go over six talking points from the Bahrain Grand Prix this past weekend. Six things I think are important to take away and how we can take that information for the following races and see if it's relevant or not. So the first thing that I want to talk about is McLaren reliability. So at winter testing, one of the big things was that McLaren got the fewest laps of any team on the board. And unfortunately, that reliability or lack thereof continued into the first race of the season. Obviously, Piastri suffered that electronics failure around lap 12, lap 14 of the race, so his Grand Prix debut was effectively cut short. And then I think what was even more depressing was Lando Norris's race. Norris was basically forced to pit every 10 laps or so, and then the team had to fill the car, put the air back in the car, basically because the pneumatic system was failing and there was a hole somewhere and air was leaking out. So I think obviously of all the teams, they had the worst reliability both in testing and in the first race of the season. And even though they effectively brought a evolution, a continuation of last year's car, they're still having quite significant challenges with it. If this was a brand new car, if this was the new B-Spec car that they were bringing, that would be a bit more understandable for those first couple races. But I think it's obviously troubling that the car is both A, not very fast, and B, very unreliable. So if you have a race where there's lots of chaos and carnage, you're A, not going to be able to pick up the pieces because you're not going to be fast, and B, you're probably going to have retired because your car is slow. And I think, obviously, hopefully this can get sorted out in the upcoming races, but I think McLaren and McLaren fans are really hoping for that new B-Spec car that they've talked about bringing in the upcoming races. Next, racetracks are not good test tracks, I think. So I think this is something that we've talked about with Barcelona for a long time. Historically, before last year, winter testing was always at Barcelona, and this would mean that when we eventually did arrive for the Spanish Grand Prix around late April, early May, the race would be kind of dull because teams have so much information about the track that they'd be able to get the perfect quality setup, perfect race setup, and the cars would basically be in the order that they are quickest, so there would never be any cars out of position and thus less overtaking. Now, last year, we also had testing at Bahrain, but the race was excellent. I think that was really because it was the first race with these generations of cars. So the difference, teams were still learning a lot about these cars and how to drive them quickly. Now this year, we again had testing, but this year we had only 37 overtakes. So I'm going to give credit to where I read this. So this was from a Reddit post on our Formula One, and it was Catching Is Something, who made a really nice post about the overtakes and lack thereof from the Bahrain Grand Prix, and how this was actually the fewest overtakes since the infamous 2010 Bahrain Grand Prix, which was on the endurance layout, which they never went back to because it was so bad. Now, I think effectively what's shown is that basically the teams have so much data from this track now, because we did 3 days of testing there, that they could get the perfect quality setup, perfect race setup, and they would basically race in formation all the way to the end of the race. And I think that's kind of true, kind of not true. I think we saw some really excellent racing between Ferrari, Aston, and Mercedes, as well as from the other teams at the back. But I think it's just that there was no teams at the back taking engine penalties. No one really qualified out of position. So I think it was maybe an anomaly. Maybe it was just part of the effect of testing. So next, I think. So historically, from I think about 2016 until 2022, with the exception of 2020 and 2021, F1's historically had this big three big teams: Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, and no one's really been able to consistently challenge them. So this year, it's possible that we have a new big four, or even a middle three, given the Red Bulls, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think we have a really exciting prospect for those three teams, the Ferrari, the Mercedes, and the Aston Martin. I'm really excited to see what kind of races we see from those three teams. I think they're probably going to be pretty close, but it's something that we've yet to see. In the past, there have been years where a team will be exceptional the first race of a season, first couple of races, and then they'll just drop off. A good example is the 2011 Renault. They actually got 2 podiums the first 2 races, and then were very mediocre the rest of the season. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see how the next couple of races develop to get a better idea of if we're really going to have this really tight battle between those 3 teams, or if Bahrain was just an outlier. And of course, moving on from that nicely is Red Bull. So Red Bull's apparent domination at the Bahrain Grand Prix, I think, definitely leaves a lot of fans quite down and out about the upcoming season. Now, in qualifying, I think the season is going to be pretty close. Maybe Red Bull will probably get the most poles, I think. But I think Leclerc, especially in the Ferrari, will probably get a couple pole positions, given how they looked in Bahrain. And at other tracks, they're not going to have all this time to get the perfect setup. So there will probably be weekends like Austria last year where the team doesn't get the optimal setup and they're a bit on the back foot, and other teams will have the opportunity to capitalize. In terms of race pace, I'm not sure. It's quite clear that the Red Bulls were holding a lot of pace in hand, and it was even said on the radio that basically from lap 1 to the end of the race, Verstappen was forced to drive to a delta. So basically he was told by his race engineer, drive this lap time, don't go faster, don't go slower. Mostly the don't go faster part, because partially because they don't want other teams to know how fast they are, and maybe put pressure on the FIA to change the rules mid-season or even into next season. And part of it is just wear and tear. When you're going at 90%, you're less likely for a failure to happen or a reliability problem to happen than if you're going at 95 or 100%. So I think it's just a combination of the two. I think on race pace, because you have Verstappen in that car, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for the other teams to beat them, at least for the start of the season. End of the season, I think you have a better chance. Obviously, that's when Red Bull's penalties, Cascot penalties from last year, will start to take effect. Next, Haas race pace. So I think for Haas, I think this kind of confirms what we knew. The qualifying looked pretty good. Hülkenberg on to Q3, and the Haas race pace was pretty poor. I think probably the slowest out of all the teams. Now, I think this is probably similar to 2019, where they have really good one-lap pace and then the tire degradation and the race pace is just awful. I hope for Hülkenberg and Magnussen's sake, they can get this sorted out and they'll be more competitive at the upcoming races. Now, last thing I want to say is the rookies are all right. So all 3 rookies on this year's grid, De Vries, Sargent, and Piastri, I think they all look pretty decent. None of them looked super out of place. I know all 3 were out-qualified by their teammate, but at the same time, in the race, they all looked pretty good. And there was no catastrophic errors on their part. We all remember the absolute disaster that was Mazepin's first Grand Prix in 2021, where he basically spun in almost every free practice session, spun in qualifying, and then crashed out on turn 3, lap 1 of the race. So I think it'll be really exciting to see how those storylines develop in the upcoming races in Saudi Arabia and then Australia. And then unfortunately we have that 1 month break, so we're going to have a while and we're going to have quite a bit of time to think about how the season's played out so far. So thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Please leave your thoughts below. What do you think are some storylines, some talking points that you think we learned from the Bahrain Grand Prix? Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.